She mocked, "I guess I'm just too much woman for you." When I caught her flirting with a waiter, I said, "No, you're just too much drama." She wasn't laughing when I left her with the bill and her parents waiting at our place. I'm a quiet guy. I don't like confrontation. I don't like scenes. My life up until last Saturday was built around avoiding drama. My girlfriend of 3 years, Isabella, was the opposite. She didn't just thrive on drama. She was a one-woman production company and life was her stage. I always told myself her need for attention was just a quirk, a part of the vibrant personality I fell for. I saw it as my role to be her anchor, the calm harbor she could return to after a long day of being, well, her. I now realize I wasn't an anchor. I was just the backstage crew managing the chaos while she hogged the spotlight. The final act of our relationship took place at Aurelia, a ridiculously expensive restaurant with soft lighting, velvet chairs, and a wine list longer than my arm. It was our third anniversary. I had booked the table a month in advance. I wanted it to be perfect. The night had another secret purpose. In my jacket pocket, nestled in a small box, was an engagement ring. I had spent 2 months' salary on it. I thought this was the night we would solidify our future. The evening started well enough, but then the waiter arrived. He was a tall, smooth-looking guy in his late 20s with a practiced smile. Isabella's eyes lit up the second he approached the table. It was like a switch had been flipped. Her attention diverted from me and locked onto him with laser-like intensity. When he asked for our drink orders, she leaned forward, touching his arm. "Well, you tell me, Marco," she said, reading his name tag with exaggerated emphasis. "What would a handsome man like you recommend for a lady tonight?" Marco, to his credit, was a professional. He smiled and recommended a wine. But Isabella didn't let it go. Every interaction was a performance. She laughed too loudly at his basic descriptions of the menu items. She asked him where he was from, if he was an aspiring actor, if he worked out. She did all of this while barely making eye contact with me. I ceased to be her anniversary date and became a silent, invisible spectator to her one-act play. I felt my jaw tightening, a slow burn of humiliation starting in my gut. I tried to steer the conversation back to us, talking about the trip we took last year, but she would just nod distractedly, her eyes scanning the room for Marco. The final straw came when he was grating Parmesan over her pasta. She looked up at him, her voice practically a purr, and said, "You have such strong hands." I put my fork down. I couldn't do it anymore. I waited for Marco to walk away, and then I leaned forward, keeping my voice low. "Isabella," I said, the words feeling heavy in my mouth. "Can you please stop? You're embarrassing me. It's our anniversary." She looked at me, a fake, innocent surprise on her face. Then she gave me that condescending little smile, the one she used when she thought I was being silly or unreasonable. She leaned back in her velvet chair, took a sip of her expensive wine, and laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was a performance for an audience of one. It was designed to cut. "Oh, Jake," she sighed, loud enough for the tables nearby to hear. "Don't be like that. I'm just having a little fun. I guess I'm just too much woman for you." And there it was, the insult wrapped in a compliment, the classic gaslighting maneuver designed to make me feel inadequate, to make my valid feelings of disrespect seem like my own personal failing. For years, I had absorbed comments like that. For years, I had let her define my reactions as my problem. But sitting there, in that overpriced restaurant, with an engagement ring burning a hole in my pocket, something inside me finally snapped, not with a bang, but with a quiet, decisive click. The show was over. I looked at her, my expression calm. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound and final sense of clarity. "No, Isabella," I said, my voice even and clear. "You're not too much woman. You're just too much drama." I stood up from the table. I placed my cloth napkin next to my plate. I looked down at her, her face a mask of shock and confusion. For the first time all night, I had her full, undivided attention. "Enjoy your dinner," I said, "and your drama." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I walked past the host stand, out the heavy oak doors and into the cool night air. The valet brought my car. As I waited, I pulled out my phone and blocked her number. I knew the frantic calls would start any second. As I drove away, leaving her alone with a $400 dinner bill and a stunned waiter, I sent a single text message. It was to her parents. They were, at that very moment, driving to my house. I had arranged for them to come over for a surprise. They thought they were about to celebrate their daughter's engagement. They had no idea they were about to become front-row spectators to the final scene of our relationship. My text to them was simple. Change of plans. Isabella is running a little late, but please head inside. The door is unlocked. Make yourselves at home. There's something important we all need to discuss when I get there. The real drama, I thought, was just about to begin. Update 1. The drive home was the calmest I had felt in years. It was a strange sensation. My life was imploding, but the oppressive weight of Isabella's constant need for validation was gone. I wasn't angry. I was just done. The finality of it was like a clean, sharp wind blowing through my soul. I wasn't thinking about the fight or the money for the dinner or even the ring in my pocket. I was mentally preparing for the next, more difficult conversation. Update 2. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw their car. Mr. and Mrs. Vance, Isabella's parents, were already inside. I had given them a key months ago for emergencies. They were good people, a bit old-fashioned, but they had always treated me with kindness. I knew this was going to be hard on them. I walked in and found them sitting on the couch, looking excited and expectant. A bottle of champagne they had brought sat on the coffee table. "Jake?" Mrs. Vance said, her face beaming. "You're back? Where's our girl? Is everything okay?" I closed the door behind me and took a deep breath. I sat down in the armchair across from them. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance," I started, my voice steady. "Thank you for coming, but I'm afraid the reason for your visit has changed. The surprise I planned is not going to happen." Their smiles faltered. "What do you mean?" Mr. Vance asked, his brow furrowing. This was it, no turning back. "Isabella and I are no longer together," I said. "The relationship is over. I ended it about an hour ago." Mrs. Vance gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What on earth happened?" "You were celebrating your anniversary." I decided to tell them the unvarnished truth. I didn't want them getting a twisted version from Isabella later. I told them about the dinner, the restaurant I had booked, the special occasion. I described, in calm, factual detail, how Isabella had spent the entire evening shamelessly and disrespectfully flirting with the waiter. I told them how I felt, how it made me feel invisible and humiliated. I tried to talk to her about it, I explained. I asked her quietly to stop, and she laughed at me. She told me, in the middle of the restaurant, that she guessed she was just too much woman for me. Mr. Vance's expression hardened. He knew his daughter. He had seen her dramatic tendencies his whole life. "I know she can be a handful," Mrs. Vance said, trying to smooth things over. "She's just very friendly, very outgoing. I'm sure she didn't mean anything by it." This was the critical point. This was where they would either enable her behavior or face the reality of it. "With all due respect, this wasn't friendliness," I said, shaking my head. "This was a pattern. This was the final example of something I've realized has been true for a long time. Isabella needs to be the center of attention at all times, no matter who it hurts or disrespects. I've spent 3 years trying to be the stable, quiet guy who supports that. But I can't build a future with someone who values the fleeting attention of a stranger over the respect of her partner on their anniversary." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small velvet box. I didn't open it. I just placed it on the coffee table next to their bottle of champagne. "The surprise tonight," I said softly, "was supposed to be this. I was going to ask her to marry me." The sight of that ring box sucked all the air out of the room. It was the physical proof of my intentions, of my commitment. It was the future that Isabella had just thrown away for a cheap thrill with a waiter. Mrs. Vance looked like she was going to cry. Mr. Vance just stared at the box, a look of profound disappointment on his face. He knew his daughter had made a catastrophic mistake. It was at that exact moment that the front door burst open. Isabella stormed in, her face a thundercloud of rage. She had clearly gotten a ride home and was ready for round 2. "Jake, I cannot believe you would." She started screaming, then stopped dead in her tracks. She saw her parents sitting on the couch. She saw the bottle of champagne, and she saw the little black box on the table. Her fury instantly evaporated, replaced by a look of horrified comprehension. She finally understood what she had done. Update 2. The scene in the living room was one of the most intense and yet satisfying moments of my life. Isabella stood frozen in the doorway, her mouth slightly agape. The warrior queen who had stormed in ready for battle was now a deer in the headlights. She looked from my face to her parents, then down at the ring box on the table. All the color drained from her face. "Mom? Dad?" She stammered. "What are you doing here?" It was her father who spoke first. His voice was low and heavy with disappointment. "We were invited, Isabella. Jake had a surprise planned for you. It seems you had a surprise of your own at the restaurant." Isabella immediately defaulted to her primary coping mechanism, playing the victim. Tears welled up in her eyes. "He abandoned me," she cried, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He left me there all alone with a huge bill. He humiliated me." But her usual audience was no longer on her side. Her parents had been prepped. They had heard my calm, rational account of the evening. They had seen the ring box. Her theatrics were falling on deaf ears. "He told us what happened, honey," her mother said gently, though her tone was firm. "He told us you were flirting with the waiter. On your anniversary." "I wasn't flirting. I was being nice," Isabella shrieked. "Jake is just insecure. He's controlling. He can't stand it when I talk to anyone." This was my cue to remain silent. My lawyer had a saying, "When your opponent is digging their own grave, don't take the shovel away." I just sat in the armchair, watching as Isabella's drama washed over her own parents. I let her reveal herself. "That's not what he said." Mr. Vance cut in, his voice sharp. "He said he felt disrespected. And from the sound of it, he had every right to. The man was about to propose to you, Isabella. Did you know that?" He gestured toward the ring box. Isabella's eyes darted to the box, then back to me, a look of desperate panic on her face. This was the part of the script she hadn't prepared for. She'd expected to come home and rage at me until I apologized and things went back to normal. She had never considered that her actions would have such immediate and irreversible consequences. Witnessed by the two people she could usually manipulate, she turned her anger on me. "You told them? You turned my own parents against me? You are a manipulative monster." This was my moment. I stood up. "No," I said, my voice cutting through her tirade. "I was honest. I told them the truth because they deserve to know why the future we were all expecting is not going to happen. This isn't a discussion, Isabella. This is a notification. Our relationship is over." I looked at her parents. "I think it's best if you take her home for the night." Then I looked back at her. "You need to leave. You can contact me in a few days to arrange a time to get your things. But you are not staying in my house tonight." The finality in my voice, combined with the stony, disappointed faces of her parents, finally broke her. She completely fell apart, sobbing uncontrollably. It wasn't the sound of heartbreak. It was the sound of a performer whose audience had walked out in the middle of her big number. It was the wail of someone who had lost control. Her father stood up, looking weary. "Come on, Bella," he said, putting an arm around her. "Let's go home." They guided their weeping, hysterical daughter out of my house and into the night. As the door closed, leaving me in the sudden, deafening silence of my own home, I walked over to the coffee table. I picked up the little black box and put it back in my pocket. The expensive bottle of champagne sat there, untouched. I took it, went into the kitchen, and poured the entire thing down the drain. Felt like washing away the last 3 years. Final update: it's been 4 months now. The drama, thankfully, is over. My life has settled into a peaceful rhythm that I cherish more than I can possibly express. The week after the incident was quiet. Isabella, humbled and likely under strict orders from her parents, did not try to contact me directly. I received a formal, polite text from her father asking when would be a good time for them to help her retrieve her belongings. We arranged a time for the following Saturday. When they arrived, it was just her and her dad. Her mom stayed in the car. The mood was somber and funereal. Isabella wouldn't look at me. She moved silently from room to room, packing her life into boxes. Her father helped her, his face a mask of tired resignation. It was all very civil and incredibly sad. As they were leaving, her father pulled me aside at the door. "Jake," he said, shaking my hand. "I just want you to know. I'm sorry for her behavior. You're a good man. You deserve better." That handshake meant more to me than he will ever know. It was validation. It was closure. I learned more about the fallout from him in that brief conversation. The restaurant bill had been a major point of contention. Isabella, of course, couldn't pay it. She had to leave her driver's license with the manager and call her parents in a panic. Mr. Vance had to drive to the restaurant the next day and pay the nearly $400 bill to get her ID back. The humiliation for him was immense. He told me that he and his wife had sat Isabella down for a long, hard talk. They were done funding her dramatic lifestyle and were tired of making excuses for her. She was living at home, but the rules were strict. As for me, the first thing I did was return the engagement ring. The jewelry store had a 30-day return policy, and I got a full refund. Getting that money back in my account felt like the final act of severing our toxic connection. The weeks that followed were about rediscovering myself. I started going to the gym again. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected because Isabella's social calendar always took priority. I took a solo weekend trip to the mountains, something she would have scoffed at as boring. I hiked for miles, sat by a lake, and just enjoyed the silence. I realized my revenge wasn't about the grand, explosive gesture. The real revenge was in my quiet, decisive action. It was in refusing to play my assigned role in her drama. By simply walking away from the table, I took away her power. By telling her parents the calm, unvarnished truth, I removed her safety net. She was left with no one to blame, no one to fight, and no audience to perform for. She was simply left alone with the consequences of her own character. Her attempt at a social media smear campaign was a complete failure. Her vague posts about heartbreak and men who can't handle strong women were met with skepticism. Too many people knew her, and a few key friends knew the real story of the anniversary dinner. The narrative that she was the victim simply didn't stick. My life is better now. It's not loud or exciting in the way it was with Isabella, and for that I am profoundly grateful. It's stable. It's peaceful. It's real. She mocked me for not being man enough for her, but I realized the truth. I was too much of a man to be her audience. I was too much of a man to be her prop. The ultimate satisfaction wasn't in leaving her with the bill. It was in reclaiming my own life, in choosing peace over performance, and in finally closing the curtain on her one-woman show.